Let's unpack those numbers that we saw coming out a little bit earlier on with Nhlanhla Gumede, who's the regulator member responsible for electricity regulation at Nersa. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Mr. Gumede. And maybe we can start by how much of an increase would we have seen if Nersa was not dealing with the court cases that Eskom was winning against the regulator?
Well, let's put it this way. The court case that we are referring to is a court case in respect of the 23 billion rands or the 69 billion rands that was given as an equity injection in the previous, in the MYPD4 era. And subsequently, the court then saying we need to add that back. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't for that, in respect of the numbers that we have before us, we would be sitting the contribution. Actually, maybe I can actually give you, I wasn't expecting that question. I can actually give you the exact number. But remember, out of the 318 billion rands that has been approved, 15 billion of that is actually related to that court case. So we would have had the increase from 250 billion to 305 to 303 billion rands. So effectively, we would still have been very close to 16%.
Yeah, and you did mention that there are a number of non-negotiable conditions that Eskom will have to comply with given the tariff increase that you've given for both 2023-24 and 24-25 financial years. Chief among them being that money that is generated by Eskom for maintenance should go to maintenance. And then you mentioned two other important ones in terms of the OCGT usage as well as the capacity losses, the unplanned capacity losses. What kind of oversight, if any, Mr. Gumede, will there be to make sure that Eskom is meeting these conditions?
Well, ideally, what we're supposed to be doing is that we should be doing this audit. So, for instance, when we approve, because remember, the multi-year pricing determination is forward-looking. So ideally, in respect of, and at the end of each period, then Eskom is allowed to then do what they call a clawback, or to have a regulatory clearing account. So ideally, what we should be doing, and perhaps it's the extent to which, especially now with COVID, which might have delayed, is that before that is even applied for, we're supposed to actually have people, and we do have people on the ground that go out and actually look at whether this amounts that have been granted to Eskom are actually used for the purposes for which they were allocated. And if there are any changes to that, is that those changes must be justified by evidence on the ground, including in terms of going up or going down. So really, we do have the inspectorate, but we, as you know, the electricity division, the electricity industry is fairly large. We've got 179 municipalities. We've got Eskom, which has got all of these complexities. So we actually audit. We may not have been too great at it, but it's something that we actually want to improve on.
Yeah, something else that needs to be improved on is going to be the energy availability factor. And Nersa, you indicated that you're asking for anything at around 65%. But given the fact that Eskom has relied on its gas turbines so heavily over the last year or so, are you confident that they're going to be able to achieve this? Or would they be able to reduce those unplanned outages that you indicated during the press briefing? I mean, evidence or anecdotal evidence that we've seen over the last year has shown that this would be very tough for them to achieve.
Well, look, as you know, in terms of, as I say, you get what you performance manage. So it's really about how we change our performance management system. That is also about how we change even the methodology itself. Because at the moment, unfortunately, there is no incentive for someone that says, as long as I've got an asset base, I get a return on that asset. As long as that can show that that asset has actually worked 1 hour or 2 hours in a year, it was used and it was useful. But we need to change that paradigm. Now, there are things that we can do within the current regulatory framework. But I think in the coming months or so, we do need to look at the regulatory framework itself. So that, for instance, we need to be quite clear and say, if we are running a particular generation plant as Mr. Plant Manager, you get granted a tariff, but you only get paid in terms of revenue for the megawatts that you actually sell. If you sell 0 megawatts, then you get 0 revenue. Unfortunately, the current methodology does not allow that. But this is how the world is functioning. As long as you allow people to hide inefficiencies in terms of averages, you get this outcome. We need to address that. But even before we address that, clearly, we do need to find ways that will allow us to better manage that situation within the existing methodology.
Would one of those ways, Mr. Gumede, would be for Eskom to consider spending a little bit more on IPP procurement as opposed to furnishing their diesel storage or reserves as a way to find sustainable and perhaps more affordable ways to produce electricity in the country? What would you say in terms of the shifting of the costs of the power utility to focus more on cleaner energy as opposed to the diesel, which, as we know, is at record level highs in terms of costs?
Well, let's put it this way. Energy is about an energy mix. The one thing that you don't want to do as an economy is to rely on any one form of energy. That's number one. But some energy carriers themselves, take solar, for instance. The sun is only up when the sun is up. Now, yes, people will argue that we can shift everything to solar. But it's an impossibility. You know that the sun is up 30% of the time. What then do you do with the other 70% of the time? What then do you do with everybody coming back to cook at this time of the day when the sun is set? So we do need to have solutions that address the problems of the country, and they come from an energy mix. It needs to be a diverse energy mix, but it can't just be one. So yes, there should be a contribution from IPPs, and these IPPs should not just be about solar and wind, because you need to have dispatchable power. So there is no economy in the world which is run just on wind and solar. None. You don't have a single one in the world, especially ones that are not interconnected. So we do need to address this issue of this dispatchable power. Should it be provided by Eskom? Perhaps not. But it can be done by the IPPs. But we cannot just rely and say all of our needs are going to come from the solar. That is totally misleading.
And then a final thought from you, Mr. Gumede. The tariff increases are the biggest source of revenue for Eskom at the moment. And as you've seen with the current climate, which you acknowledged, you know, consumers and businesses are under immense pressure. The kind of increases that we are seeing are not sustainable. Ultimately, as Nersa, realistically, what are you hoping will be achievable by the power utility in partnership with relevant stakeholders like the departments of mineral resources and energy, as well as the public enterprises, if any involvement there?
Maybe just get when I say achievable in terms of what? In terms of
making sure that sustainability of alternative forms of revenue, because these tariff increases cannot be Eskom's biggest source of revenue. It's just not sustainable, particularly when you look at the way the consumer and businesses are struggling in the country at the moment.
Well, let's put it this way. Unfortunately, for every service, so when we're talking about alternative, Eskom is not prevented from actually entering into non-regulated businesses. But unfortunately, when it comes to electricity provision, both in terms of generation, transmission, or distribution, is that those are regulated. That's the regulated business. But it's a particular service offer, and that in itself, it should be able to fund itself. If it's run efficiently, it should be able to fund itself efficiently. So, but it's nothing stopping Eskom from actually participating in non-regulated businesses now.
Thank you very much for those insights. That is Mr. Nhlanhla Gumede, who's a regulator member responsible for electricity regulation at Nersa.